So you should, once he decides to show it, be able to see my screen as well. So welcome everyone, and thanks again, Matthias, for setting it up and introducing it so nicely. And also thanks to all participants to join us here. Hopefully we'll have an active discussion as well. It's quite an active and interactive time, in particular from a Habitat 3 perspective at the moment, and timing couldn't have been better. The zero draft of the Habitat 3 new urban agenda has just been published yesterday, so excellent that we have a chance to have a chat about this and about the role in that process as well. So as Matthias mentioned, I'll just go briefly through the Habitat 3 process and the key messages of the policy unit that covered the transport area, which is urban services and technology, and how that features in the current draft. And then hopefully we can have some discussions on the way forward before I'll hand over to Corny. And the Habitat 3 conference, which takes place in October in Quito in Ecuador this year, is a conference that happens every 20 years, the Habitat Conference, trying to set a landmark on urban development. And this time it's particularly timely from a sequential perspective as well, as we had the Sustainable Development Goals adopted in September last year, and then followed by a, let's say, reasonably successful Paris Agreement in December, which was just signed in April in New York. So a lot of positive movement with regard to sustainable development and climate action is happening, and the Habitat 3 conference is really the first implementation-oriented process and conference, and that's hopefully also then followed up by lots of action after the conference. And this, of course, is something that you will all be familiar to some extent, I'm sure, but I've always find it quite interesting to just bring it up in the development context of our cities, just to see also that our cities only cover 2% of the land area, but are responsible for the vast majority of our energy and CO2 consumption, global waste, and also the economic productivity, which shows that if we focus on cities, we definitely get the biggest bang for the buck with regard to impact. It also shows that the development toward mega cities may not necessarily be, a natural given and something that we all have to thrive towards, just because there would certainly be enough space for a more decentralized, a more people-oriented, mid-sized city sort of urban development pathway. And the Habitat 3 process already started quite some time ago with what I found quite a nice and inclusive approach, aiming to bring in all the relevant stakeholders well beyond just the member country participations, but also civil society in quite a number of different formats and participant processes, one of which is the policy unit that was set up last year, covering thematic areas of urban development, 10 policy units in total, about 20 people each of which would then be delivering an input on the thematic area toward the new urban agenda, and the unit that covered transport was called Urban Services and Technology, and had right from the beginning a very strong focus on transport, even though that sort of was my goal for the participation in the unit, so was already acknowledged to be one of the main driving and shaping factors for urban development. So from a setting the scene perspective, that already worked quite well. And that unit covered experts from all the regions, from networks, from think tanks, from city and public transport networks and authorities. So quite a nice range of people there. And we came up with 4 key messages with regard to urban services in general. That includes in transport. But you can see here, of course, that this is something that is very applicable to sort of our daily work. Where in an initial step, we said that access to urban services is the key. Then to use those services, policies and infrastructures and technologies as efficiently as possible, have local leadership to initiate it and to implement it, and to have national policies in place that support that. And this logical structure follows through an approach that is also taken quite nicely in now the zero draft of the new urban agenda, where we said we would go beyond the description of the problems, but really focus on implementation-oriented language and pathways. So from the access perspective, a key message that we wanted to stress was that everyone needs to have access to all the major urban services, as these are really vital to participate in the economic and social activities of a city, to have opportunities and access to jobs and education and healthcare. And this is the role that transport has to play there in particular, and this is why transport has such a big role in our policy unit, and also further on in the zero draft of the new urban agenda. And this is somewhat, from an emphasis, one could say somewhat different compared to the Sustainable Development Goals in a way, where energy gets a much more prominent focus, let's say, with its own goal, and transport being part of a number of others, of course, also very prominent, but not as prominent. And that's sort of the opposite way as it is here in the Habitat 3 process, where energy also plays a big role, but is somewhat more on the sidelines, let's say, from an interventional perspective for the cities, and transport really is here at the core, and this is because of its role as an enabler. And then once we have provided access for all to urban basic services, then we'll need to use them as efficiently as possible. And here it also was reasonably common sense in the team that the first option of all is to reduce unnecessary travel as much as possible, as similar as to the other sectors, through dense urban development. And then as a secondary, second most important option is the provision of low carbon mobility modes. And then come all the technology options, and we had on occasion quite a heated debate about the term smart cities, because it is so technology driven, and we decided against that approach, emphasizing the role of, say, the non-technology driven solutions that are really at the core of sustainable urban development, and then technology covers the rest, brings us sort of the rest of the way. And to initiate that, local leadership is absolutely vital, as we have seen in many cities. That includes the political level, of course, but also stakeholders and coalitions between them in a city and across the levels of government. And this is sort of because it is a UN process, so it's focusing primarily, or as in the first instance, addressing national governments. The role of national governments we've emphasized here as well as being assisting local governments and providing them with the means to implement sustainable urban mobility and sustainable urban services solutions. But we also said that, you know, if national governments are not willing to support sustainable urban development, then at least they should provide the opportunities to local authorities to directly interact with international institutions. One example is that the Global Environment Facility is still only accessible if you partner with your national government and not from a city itself. So that's something that in the implementation process then of the new urban agenda we'll have to look into more closely to provide cities with the opportunity to be active, even if their national government is not willing or able to help. And these key messages came through reasonably nicely in the draft that was just released from the Habitat 3 Secretariat and is currently open for comments. And this is also why I would strongly encourage you to come up with any major issues or thoughts that you might have on the key messages so far, because the process is open until the end of the month, I believe, right? 30th of May. And here we could see quite nicely that transport is acknowledged as a key enabler, and its important role is very strongly, much stronger, I believe, than it was in the Sustainable Development Goals. Here it comes out much more clearly. And also the order of importance with regard to the ability to provide access first and then focus on efficiency is coming out quite nicely. Climate action, because we are talking here about the route between Paris and Quito, is mentioned but not as strong as in other processes, so this might be something to stress, in particular with regard to the opportunities that arise from a low carbon development pathway. And let's say the caution about technology, I do think is also reflected quite nicely in the Zero draft, and the focus on a people-centered approach rather than a technology-driven approach is coming out quite okay, I believe. So, and this is why the Habitat 3 process and the new urban agenda is quite relevant, I believe, for all our work, because it is setting a framework, and some of us might think that UN processes are boring and long, and they are, but they can set quite a nice framework and generate a dynamics that can help us with our daily work. And so this could be a reference point to build on the new urban agenda in our projects and work with our cities. And this, of course, should not reinvent the wheel. It should build on existing initiatives and networks, similar in a way as other processes have done. For example, the Lima Paris Action Agenda that led towards the COP21, and I think Corny's talking about that in a minute. So that could be something to showcase the great activities that are out there and support cities that are able and willing to work towards implementation of the targets and objectives that are outlined in the New Urban Agenda. And this could build on a number of platforms that are out there at the moment. And with that, I would just probably stop for a second and wait if you have any comments or ideas. And I'm almost exactly on time, as I was told.
Okay, Oliver, many thanks for your presentation and your insights into the work of the policy unit number 9. I think you have done a great job there. So when I simply see how what was the state of the policy issue briefs at the beginning of the process and how they are now, you have been working a lot to advance them and really reflecting up-to-date knowledge there. I think we can actually allow 1 or 2 immediate questions maximum. If someone has a question, then you may use the chat function. Otherwise, we will just directly go ahead and jump over to Corny's presentation, and at the end of his presentation, of Corny's presentation, we will have some time to discuss as well. So it seems that there are no urgent questions coming in.
Do I now hand over to Corny, or can you do that? Matthias?
So,
okay.
I think now Corny has the moderation, and now Corny should be able to share his screen.
Thank you. Maybe Matthias, because it says that I need to download first an extension. So maybe it's easier if you just move the slides when I say so.
Okay. All right. I will do that. Just give me a second.
Yeah.
Presentation. That should be the beginning slide. I hope you can actually see the right one. So you can see the first slide of your presentation now, yes?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, so welcome. And thank you, Oliver, for doing an excellent job to speak about the Habitat 3 process. So that makes my task a little bit easier. What I would like to do in the next 15 or 20 minutes is to talk about the work that SLOCAT is doing, and partly through the Paris process on mobility and climate, with respect mostly on the climate change summit from last year, but also a little bit on the Sustainable Development Goals. Next, Matthias. So with respect to the SLOCAT partnership, a number of you, I've looked at the participants list, are familiar with the SLOCAT partnership, but a number of you, I assume, are not. SLOCAT, which is the short name, was established 6 years ago, or 7 years ago now, in 2009, currently about 100 members, which includes international organizations, governments, development banks, NGOs, private sector, academia. And I'm happy to see a number of the SLOCAT members as part of the participants. We have a very simple but ambitious objective. How do we integrate sustainable transport in global policies on sustainable development and climate change? And so from that perspective, the new urban agenda, which was published recently for the Habitat 3 process, is actually quite nice that we are actually making progress there. The SLOCAT partnership is supported by a SLOCAT foundation. This was established in 2014, and the sole objective of the foundation is to support the functioning of the SLOCAP partnership. I would like to say thank you to all of those organizations who are helping SLOCAP to do its work, and I note that GIZ has been one of our most generous supporters. So thank you, Matthias. Next.
Yeah. Could have a delay? I hope you see a delay.
Okay. Yeah. No, there is a little bit of a delay, but so I think that should work. I think that two of the global processes or three of the global processes have been mentioned. We have talked about, there's been reference to the Paris Agreement on climate change. There's been reference to the 2030 Sustainable Development Goal, Habitat 3. And there is one more conference which is taking place in 2016, which we think also is important for sustainable transport, and that is the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. And we expect that that conference will speak especially about freight and logistics. Next. With respect to the SDGs, and Oliver has spoken briefly about this, the Sustainable Development Goals were set up as you could say, as a complement or as a successor to the Millennium Development Goals. And going back to the Millennium Development Goals, it was interesting to see that around the beginning of the millennium or the beginning of the century, that the global community says that we want to take ownership for certain targets with respect to development. And they said, like, it's no longer acceptable that we have this number of people living in poverty, this number of people living in slums, children dying. And there was a concerted effort around the year 2000, is to say, to come up with a number of goals which would guide the global development process. And that was actually the first time that we saw such an effort to steer development. These Millennium Development Goals were adopted with a time frame of 15 years, so they came to an end in 2015. And that meant that at the beginning, or let's say that around 2012, when we had a large conference in Rio de Janeiro, there was an agreement that they said, like, the Millennium Development Goals have been successful in supporting global development, and we want to succeed those with a broader set of goals. And this is what was then became the Sustainable Development Goals. So while the Millennium Development Goals have a strong emphasis on social issues and a bit on environment, the Sustainable Development Goals are broader in scope and also look at the productive sectors. And this was especially at the request of the developing world, who said that we cannot speak about social and poverty issues if we do not speak about how to generate the wealth to address these issues. In the Sustainable Development Goals, transport does not have a separate goal, but instead there was a choice from the countries to mainstream transport across a large number of the goals. And what we currently see is transport is mainstreamed in 8 SDGs, and you could say that there are two sides to it. On the one hand, we have a number of targets which talk about improving access, and this was also something that Oliver referred to with the access for all. And there are a number of targets which are related to the strengthening of the sustainability. So on the one hand, considering that the urban population will grow with 2.5 billion people, we need to grow the transport sector, but at the same time we also need to do transport differently. So those are so that's what is encapsulated in the transport and the SDGs. So next. So moving to the COP. The COP really dominated my life to a large extent last year, and I think the lives of many people. What you see here on the slide is a number of cheering people, and what is unique here is that we see UNFCCC, we see France, and we see the Secretary General, and these are really the people who have made a difference. Like, it is Ban Ki-moon who throughout his, especially his second term, has made climate change one of his key advocacies. We see the Executive Secretary of UNFCCC, Christiana Figueres, and we see a number of people from the side of France. And France also played a major role in trying to and successfully getting 196 countries to agree on a common agreement. As you can see from the numbers, 40,000 participants, 3,000 journalists, so this was quite a mega event in Paris over 2 weeks last year. Next. And so here we have a slide which really summarizes to a large extent what came out of Paris. When we went to Paris, the general understanding was that the ideal outcome would be an agreement which would support the recommendations of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and that we should limit the temperature increase to 2 degrees until the end of the century. And this was based on the understanding that this would lead to a limited temperature increase, but that this would still be manageable for society to deal with economically and socially. So what happened then in Paris was that a number of the small island states actually said, wait a moment, have you looked at the detailed impacts of this 2-degree scenario? And they said this still puts the life and the existence of a number of, especially the small island states, at risk, and will lead to considerable climate impacts across the world. And it is interesting to note that a few months after the climate summit in Paris, that we see now that the first climate refugees in the US have been resettled, and we start to see a broader acknowledgement of the impacts of climate change. So it was really truly remarkable that we had an agreement which did not stop at the 2-degree scenario, but says we need to limit temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Next. So here you see what are the implications of this 2 and a 1.5 degree scenario. The slide is slightly busy, but in general what we can say is that if we move to a 1.5 degree scenario, it means that collectively in the world we will have to reduce emissions by 80% up to 2050. So what we see here are the numbers up to 2035, and there we talk about a decrease of about 55%, but remember 80% by 2050. So that means that we largely need to decarbonize most of the energy-related sectors, including the transport sector. At the same time, what we mentioned earlier and what Oliver was talking about is we also need to improve access. And this is something which will especially be the case in the developing world, in Africa and in Asia, and to some extent in Latin America. And so what we see is that over the next you could say 25 years, we will see initially an increase in emissions in the developing world, but then subsequently this will have to go down as well. We see that the decrease in emissions will have to start on an immediate basis in the developed world, which is sometimes also described as the OECD countries. Next. So if we see that we need to take urgent action, if we see that we need to take transformative action, so then the question is, what is it that the countries were talking about in Paris? And it was interesting that there was a process which was called nationally determined contributions, in which countries were asked to formulate their plans, what they would do with respect to climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation, starting in the period from 2020, when the new agreement officially comes into force. And what we saw is that countries actually were aware of the contribution of transport to greenhouse gas emissions, because a large number of the countries, 77% of all the countries, included transport in their proposed mitigation actions. And you can see here on this slide, you can see the various kinds of measures which were proposed in these nationally determined contributions. We saw that there was still somewhat an emphasis on technology, but we also see other things like bus improvements. We talk about rail, we talk about mobility plans, we talk about fuel subsidies. So there was still quite a wide range. What is important is that the mitigation ambition of these nationally determined contributions fell far short of the 2-degree target, or let alone the 1.5-degree target. Like collectively, these NDCs still amounted to 2.7 or 3 degrees temperature increase. So that this is almost double from the 1.5 degrees. Next time. What was important in that in Paris we did not only see action from governments or from states, but there was also a whole parallel program of actions by non-state actors. And this goes back to the work of the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, who organized in September 2014 a climate summit in which he invited non-state actors to come up with ambitious actions and initiatives to promote climate change mitigation and adaptation. Currently, there are about 70 of these initiatives under what has become known as the Lima Paris Action Agenda. And out of those 70 initiatives, which are divided over 12 sectors, 15 cover transport. So transport is relatively well represented amongst these non-state actors. We see that they cover all major modes of transport, they cover all major regions. We were very happy that the PPMC was invited as a convener of a high-level transport focus on December the 3rd, which was the first time that transport was really part of the formal COP program. If we look at it collectively, these transport initiatives, which are shown by pictures and by icons on this slide, collectively, we believe that these initiatives, if implemented at scale, could impact 1 in 2 trips for passenger or freight by 2025. At the same time, there are calculations as well that full implementation of these initiatives could collectively save society up to $100 trillion by 2050, because we would be spending far less on transport infrastructure and we would be spending far less on vehicles and on fuel and fuel infrastructure. All of it because, let's say, collective transport is cheaper than individualized private transport. A number of the initiatives that you see here relate to the urban transport. We have public transport, we have cycling, we have urban mobility plans, we have electric vehicles, we have cycling, and a number of others. Yeah. Next. So one of the things that we have recently done is that we say that, is it possible to bring together the actions by non-state actors with the proposed actions proposed by the governments through the national determined contributions? And what we see is that there actually is quite a strong overlap. that we say that, for example, in the case of public transport, that currently about 50% of the NDCs, which were submitted last year, actually make reference to public transport. So we see that this could be quite a good mix between the two. Next. So what does this mean for the work that SLOCAT is doing in 2016? So we reduced this to ABC, so that which is easy to remember. We say the A for ambition, the B for balance, and the C for convergence. So first and foremost, I think we need to be ambitious. And if we look at it in the wider context, we currently still have 1 billion people who live in rural areas and who do not have access to transport. At the same time, we expect that we will be adding 2.5 billion people extra to the cities by 2050. Both the people in the rural areas and these additional people in the cities will need to have access to transport in order to be able to prosper economically and to function socially. So that really means massive investments are required in transport, infrastructure and services. And we are happy to see that, for example, that the new urban agenda calls for that. At the same time, we still have a very large number of people dying in traffic. Currently 1.24 million people per year are dying, and about 10 times as much are seriously injured. Then we need to be ambitious with respect to the climate, and this is what we have said there as well. In terms of balance, we need to have a balance between action by state and non-state actors. But more importantly, also coming back to the technology argument from Oliver, we need to have a balance between technological change and modal shift, moving people out of cars into public transport or walking or cycling, and behavioral change, that people say, do I really need to make this trip? In terms of convergence, we say it's important that we converge the agenda on sustainable development with the agenda on climate change. And we need to realize, like as it says on the right-hand side of the slide, we need to work together because we can only transform the sector once. We cannot transform it in support of climate change and then do it again in support of sustainable development. We will only get one shot. Next. So it is important to develop a global narrative on sustainable low-carbon transport that can support short, medium, and long-term action. And so from our side, we are looking at three elements. We are looking at a common framework that sets out goals. We look at a roadmap. How do we decarbonize the transport sector? And lastly, we say, like, what are some quick wins which we can undertake at the short term in order to kickstart this transformation? Next. In terms of the goals, I think that this goes partly back to what Oliver was speaking about. We say that we should have a discussion on 4 possible goals. One is access for all, one is efficiency, one is safety, and one is climate. What is important is that we should realize that the developed and the developing world will have a differentiated pathway to realize these goals, because the situation is not equal in the developed and in the developing world. It will be important as well to have a global tracking framework to measure the progress towards these goals, and we will need to have country-specific indicators. Next. So then, one of the most difficult parts will be, how do we reach agreement and how do we put the transport sector on track for a zero net emission economy early in the second part of the century to secure a well below 2 degrees Celsius climate target. It is one thing to say that we need to promote low carbon transport. It is another thing that we say we actually need to decarbonize the transport sector, and that climate science dictates that this needs to be done before the end of the century. So one of the things that we are working on at the moment in the SLOCAT partnership is to develop a, you could say, a roadmap how this could be done. And as you can see here from the different, we have listed 8 elements here, and this really combines technology, modal shift, and behavioral change. Next. Then, with respect to the quick wins, I mentioned that the common framework and these goals, which are linked to the Sustainable Development Goals, this is a 15-year time horizon. The roadmap that we spoke about has a time horizon which goes up to 2050 or 2080 in the case of the developing countries, and it's important that we start taking action now as well. And this is why we propose to promote a number of quick wins which can be implemented now, which have substantial sustainable development benefits, which have been tested at scale, and which can spur further action. To give you an idea, the elimination of fuel subsidies, which currently cost $500 billion a year, this could be done over the next 3 to 4 years. There should be no problem in eliminating fuel subsidies if there is a political will to do so. Tightening of fuel economy standards is also something which could be put in place across all countries in the world. Urban mobility plans, which would guide the further development of public transport, land use, etc. in cities, is also something that if we would make a collective effort, that we should be able to do that also in hundreds of cities over the next 5 years. We can also take action in freight. For example, there are very successful freight recognition programs which have resulted in reductions of 20 to 25% emissions in the companies that take place. So we need to combine the common framework, the roadmap, and the quick win actions. So then moving to the last slide. So in terms of the follow-up that SLOCAT will be working on in 2016, we need to build consensus on the common framework, the roadmap, and the quick wins. What is important is that we need to get buy-in from all key stakeholders. Within SLOCAT, we have been quite successful in building support among certain groups, but we feel that there is a stronger need to get national and local governments actively involved, and we should get the private sector more actively involved as well. Then it will be important to develop what we call a medium-term strategy to mobilize actions in support of the NDCs, the LPAA, Habitat 3 outcomes and recommendations, and UNCTAD. And then lastly, if we have all of these organizations working on the promotion of sustainable transport, both in the policy arena in terms of capacity building, in terms of knowledge management, we also need to see how do all of these organizations work together. So we say that in 2016 we should also spend time to talk about the governance and how we can strengthen and expand the existing coalitions on sustainable transport, and in some cases we need to consider whether new additional institutional arrangements are required as well. From our side, we hope to see the transport community at 3 transport days, one in Surabaya in July, one in Quito during Habitat 3, and one in Marrakesh during COP22. Thank you.
Yes, Corny, many thanks for your great presentation and the insight into the strategy that SLOCAT, together with all the partner organizations, is following up. It makes me really happy to hear that we actually have that strategy, because otherwise we would be lost, and cities as well as governments who don't have a good strategy, they usually undertake actions which counteract their objectives. So many thanks also for your great coordinating work in the SLOCAT partnership, and many thanks to Oliver for his work in the policy units and in the great projects that he actually is leading and where he is involved as well, like the Solutions project. Yes, at this point I would like to open the discussion to the audience. So everybody is invited to address questions to Oliver as well as to Connie. So please make big use of the chat function, or also just write me if you would use the microphone, and I will unmute you, and you will get into the discussion. Okay, yes, that's quite normal that the first questions take a while, but there is already the first one, and it's from Georgios Vokas, and he's asking to what extent the lack of capacity building in developing countries is a barrier for the implementation of quick win solutions. So that question goes to Connie, and if I'm allowed to say one more point, Germany is organizing the German Habitat Forum in the beginning of June, and gathering a lot of experts, mayors and NGOs from developing countries as well, and Sloka is organizing a workshop there on innovative urban mobility with a lot of influx from from cities and from countries which have tackled that question. So Brazil will be one of the co-conveners and has developed ambitious urban mobility policies. So, Connie, please, you have the words.
Yeah, thank you, Matthias. Yeah, so with respect to the question of Georgios on capacity, I think that the quick wins need to be selected in such a manner that you would say that that either the capacity is there, or that you say that that there are efforts underway to build capacity specific to that issue. I mentioned the example of the fuel economy standards. We know that we can propose fuel economy standards as a quick win because we know that there is an initiative called the Global Fuel Economy Initiative, which has the resources to work with interested countries to actually put regulations in place and to develop this. Likewise, there is an initiative called Mobilize Your City, which is a joint French and European, French-German initiative with support from the European Union, and which is also again offering assistance to cities to actually develop these sustainable urban mobility plans. So if we do our work properly in looking at these issues of capacity, I think that we can circumvent this issue of lack of capacity in developing countries and still have successful quick wins.
Yes, thank you, Connie, for answering, and Georgios from TL for the question. As there is no other question at the moment, I would like to address Oliver one more time on his work in the policy units. As I know, the work has quite been in a very hurrying manner. There was very little time to actually develop the recommendations themselves, and it required a lot of engagement of the different policy experts. How it was actually the relation between the different experts? About what points did you argue? Where did you maybe disagree? Or I think it is not so easy to, if we are speaking with a number of experts and everybody has his certain focus, to agree really on one set of recommendations. Maybe some more insights on that from Oliver.
Right. Interesting. Well, actually, apart from the one issue, if it's about the role of technology, you know, we were quite well on the same page with regards to the basic like targets and objectives, but the one issue that always comes up in these kind of rounds is a technology versus a people-centered approach, and it's true that people working on smart cities and technology-driven activities and projects, can model you quite nicely a world with zero carbon that is delivered entirely by a technology shift, which is true in theory, but then of course from a more holistic sustainable development perspective, you only address one issue and not others. The issue of green congestion is the typical one that always comes up in these kind of discussions. But yeah, I mean, apart from that, it's fair to say we were quite nicely on the same page with the basic issues. And while you mentioned the German Habitat Forum, just to also mention that this is a great initiative, and I hope that other member states also come up with something closely as ambitious to that what the German government is currently working on. So that's great help from member states to show that it's not just about a UN policy document, but there is some serious thought put into a follow-up process from the New Urban Agenda.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, many thanks.
Matthias?
Yes?
Matthias, maybe with respect to the question of Søren, who is asking with respect to what is the role of the policy units in the implementation of the New Urban Agenda, I think that is something that Oliver can speak to. But I wanted to say something in general on implementation. Mm-hmm. We feel that the draft of the New Urban Agenda is quite, I would say, effective in changing the paradigm on the development of the transport sector. I think that it says many of the right things that we have been saying for the last number of years. The concern that we have is that the document does not really state the scale of action required. So while it talks about low carbon transport in general, it does not talk about the need to decarbonize. And we feel that this is somewhat a missed chance. We see that there are various cities in the world which have made commitments already to talk about decarbonizing, for example, public transport. We also see that there are a number of cities who are indicating that they would like to become carbon neutral. Considering that the Habitat 3 process is a 20-year process, as Oliver explained at the beginning, that means that the next time that we would meet again on the Habitat process is 2036. By that time, we should be well underway in terms of decarbonizing not only the transport sector but also the housing and the energy sector. By not putting a stronger emphasis on this in the new urban agenda, I think that this could be a missed opportunity. So this is, I think, one of the points for discussion in the next rounds when the new urban agenda is being discussed in New York in three sessions, as well as in Surabaya. On the second part of the question of Søren on the events in Quito, there will be a dedicated transport day in Quito, whereby we will bring all the transport stakeholders together. In addition to that, we know that several of the SLOCAT members are also planning activities in Quito. So we think that it should be well worth the effort to go to Quito if you want to go to the Habitat 3 process, be witness of the adoption of the new urban agenda, but also if you want to be engaged in discussions on sustainable transport.
Well, to that other part of the question, Not that we know of so far. With regard to your question on the policy units being part of the implementation process, and from the perspective of Habitat itself, there are definitely ambitions to be at the forefront of the implementation activities and be a driving force there. Nothing is concrete just yet. That's why initiatives from different NGOs, projects, but also initiatives like the one led by the German government with GIZ and BMZ being very active there to develop something of an implementation plan are so important, because it's really up to all of us to use that and to turn that into something real. If we rely on the UN processes alone, I don't think that's necessarily their role and mandate to lead the implementation process. I think they would love to have a big role in it, but it's up to the member states and to civil society actors to make a contribution to the implementation.
Yeah, I think that is a kind of important point to stress out, where also the New Urban Agenda targets the problems. It speaks a lot about strengthening urban actors, urban stakeholders in pushing sustainable development. Okay, so with respect to the time that we are already a little bit over 3 p.m., at least here in Middle Europe, I would like to say thank you for everybody, particularly to our both speakers, Oliver and Corny, for taking the time and informing us about the developments on the global agendas for urban mobility. And yeah, I would like to inform you that we have our next webinar on 15th of June on urban transport and health, like taking up one particular issue and how to tackle that together with WHO. I will shortly inform you about the details. And please allow me to also provide you some further information, some further links. You can find a lot of information on the SLOCAT webpage itself. You will find here the SLOCAT results framework on sustainable transport, which covers the Sustainable Development Goals for urban mobility and their role. We have here together also with SLOCAT developed a publication which highlights a more systematic approach for using climate finance for sustainable transport. And we have several modules of the Sustainable Urban Transport Projects, which focuses on dedicated issues like climate change, health, or also gender and inclusion issues, which are available in several languages. We will make available the recording of the webinar in a short time, as well as the presentation, and you can find it here on Capsud. And of course, we are also invited to check this webpage from time to time. You will find here a lot of events also from other stakeholders globally, worldwide. If you are an institution, you are also invited to provide information about your training offers, be it like regional training courses, be it webinars, be it e-learning offers, or be it also university curricula on sustainable transport. So this will be a platform for you. Here you'll find also further links to our offers of GIZ Transport and Mobility, which you may check later on as well. And one more time, thank you to everybody. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact us after this webinar via email.
Great. Thank you very much, Matthias.
Yes, okay. So thanks to Oliver again and to Corny, and goodbye. Have a good day.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.